General Hospital spoilers tease that Jordan stood at the intersection of identity and implosion. Her once firm sense of self slowly dissolving under the weight of choices she never intended to make and consequences she could no longer contain. In the beginning, she believed she could compartmentalize the emotional chaos Curtis stirred within her. After all, they had history, and history had its ghosts. But now, that history was bleeding into every aspect of her life. Curtis, the man who had once made her feel grounded, was now the epicenter of her confusion. His presence alone ignited a storm of longing, betrayal, and resentment, all fighting for space in her heart. He wasn't just her ex-husband, he was the unresolved question she never dared to answer. And just as she found herself tempted to reach back into a past riddled with pain, there was Isaiah, the man who had offered her something real, something healing, something honest. Yet instead of embracing the peace Isaiah represented, Jordan pushed it away, caught in a destructive cycle of emotional self-sabotage that was beginning to consume her. Each day became a balancing act between pretending she still had control and privately falling apart. Her decisions were no longer rooted in logic or professional discipline, they were reactive, emotional, and increasingly erratic. Friends began to notice the cracks, colleagues whispered behind closed doors, and even Isaiah, patient and kind-hearted as he was, started to withdraw. Uncertain if Jordan was still the woman he had fallen for. The confusion only deepened as Curtis's world grew darker with secrets of his own. His involvement with hidden agendas and questionable alliances put him under public scrutiny, and in turn, placed Jordan in the uncomfortable position of having to choose between loyalty and morality. She knew too much, and yet not enough. The tension between them simmered dangerously, blurring the lines between personal betrayal and professional compromise. Meanwhile, Isaiah, though heartbroken, wasn't naive. He could see the patterns repeating, the way Jordan let Curtis occupy space in her life that should have belonged to healing. And while he respected her struggle, he began to question whether he was simply a placeholder, a reprieve from pain rather than a partner for the future. Jordan's inability to let go of Curtis, even as that connection hurt her, began to erode Isaiah's hope. Their once burning romance now flickered, unstable, uncertain, and on the brink of extinction. The town of Port Charles watched with a mix of concern and curiosity as Jordan's decisions grew bolder, more volatile. She'd snap at friends, second-guess herself in high-stakes cases, and withdraw from allies she once trusted. She wasn't just lost, she was redefining herself in the most painful and destructive way possible. The quiet strength that once defined her had given way to a loud, restless urgency to prove something, to herself, to Curtis, to Isaiah, to a world that she felt slipping through her fingers. And as if fate were mocking her, both Curtis and Isaiah found themselves pulled into her spiraling descent. Curtis, whose secrets threatened to explode at any moment, found himself needing Jordan in ways that were no longer about love, but survival. And Isaiah, in his wounded silence, began considering whether loving Jordan meant saving her, or letting her go for good. The triangle that had once seemed like a temporary complication had transformed into a psychological battleground. Jordan's choices weren't just hurting her, they were tearing through the emotional lives of two men who had once offered her different versions of safety. And with every passing day, the town saw less of the composed, intelligent, morally sound commissioner, and more of a woman fraying at the seams, refusing to admit she was unraveling. It wasn't just a personal crisis. It was a transformation, and whether it would end in redemption or complete collapse remained to be seen. The Jordan of old was gone. In her place was someone who had tasted regret, chased chaos, and stood staring into the mirror of her own undoing, hoping that behind the wreckage, she could still find herself again. Jordan Ashford once stood as a symbol of authority, dignity, and control in Port Charles. A woman who had worked tirelessly to establish herself in a world that often sought to tear people like her down, she had built a career as a respected commissioner. A powerful figure in both the legal and social spheres. But now, after everything she had lost, after everything she had endured, Jordan found herself at a crossroads. Facing a future that seemed uncertain at best, chaotic at worst. It wasn't just about her career anymore. It wasn't just about the job she had worked so hard for, or the family that had been torn apart by secrets and lies. What mattered now was the most difficult thing Jordan had ever faced, the battle for control over her own life. She could feel it in her bones, the sense of losing something crucial, something that made her feel whole, something that tied her to the world. The emotional turmoil she had been grappling with after the dissolution of her relationship with Curtis had left her fragile, vulnerable in ways she never expected. The man who had once been the love of her life, the father of her children, had become a reminder of all the things she couldn't control. Curtis's secrets, his lies, and their eventual separation shattered her trust. That betrayal stung deeper than any professional setback she had ever faced. It was no longer just about Curtis and their relationship. It was about the realization that her entire life, both personal and professional, was slipping through her fingers, like sand she couldn't catch. For a while, Jordan had tried to push those feelings aside. She immersed herself in work, buried herself in the demanding nature of her position, trying to ignore the emotional wreckage piling up inside. But it wasn't enough. It never had been. There was something inside her, something broken, something yearning for validation, that refused to stay quiet. The respect. The control. It was no longer just about getting her life back on track, it was about proving to herself, and everyone else, that she could overcome the mess she had been handed. But in her drive to regain control, Jordan found herself spiraling down a dangerous path. She had once been the woman who made difficult decisions, who acted with precision and clarity. But now, every choice she made seemed clouded by doubt and desperation. Her attempts to rebuild her life became less about genuine healing and more about creating the illusion of strength, of dominance. The world she had once commanded with confidence now felt like a battlefield. Her emotions were raw and unfiltered, even if their relationship had fractured beyond repair. Despite everything, Jordan still found herself drawn to Curtis, unable to let go of what they had once shared. Even as their relationship became more toxic with each passing day. She hated herself for it, but she couldn't stop herself from reaching out to him, hoping for something, anything, that would make her feel in control again. But every time she tried to connect, every time she found herself slipping into old patterns. She realized that her need for Curtis was not about love, it was about dependency. It was about the idea of what their relationship had been, not the reality of what it was now. And with that realization came a painful truth. She was still clinging to the past, to a version of herself that no longer existed. As she navigated through these emotional wreckages, she found herself searching for any anchor to cling to. That's when Isaiah entered her life, a kind and patient man who seemed to understand her in ways that no one else did. He provided a sense of calm, a reprieve from the storm that raged inside her. But even Isaiah, with his warmth and empathy, wasn't enough to fill the emptiness she felt. The pull of Curtis. The addiction to power, the need to prove herself, these things overshadowed the relationship she was trying to build with Isaiah. Her decisions, once clear and rational, now felt impulsive and erratic. She started making choices that alienated those closest to her. Her friendships frayed. Her professional relationships became strained. Isaiah began to pull away, sensing that something was fundamentally wrong, but unable to reach her. Curtis, ever the complicated figure in her life, began pulling away as well, his own personal issues and secrets making him distant, cold. Jordan's world was unraveling, piece by piece, and yet she couldn't stop herself from pushing forward. She couldn't stop herself from trying to grasp something, anything, that would give her back that sense of power and control. But as she delved deeper into her quest for dominance, she realized something even more terrifying. The more she sought control, the more she lost it. The power she had once commanded, the authority that had once defined her, was slipping away like water through her fingers. Her obsession with control turned into an addiction, and the more she tried to hold on, the more she found herself spiraling into madness. She was becoming the very thing she had fought against, the chaos, the destruction. She had built her life around control, around the idea that if she could just keep everything in order, everything would be okay. But now, as she pushed harder, everything around her was falling apart. The hardest part was realizing that her need for control had become a prison. The walls were closing in, and there was no way out. The more she tried to fight for power, the more she lost herself. The more she tried to reclaim her life, the more she realized she had no idea who she was anymore. Was she the woman who had risen through the ranks of the police force with dignity and skill? Or was she the broken woman lost in a sea of mistakes and regrets? Was she the mother who had once held her family together, or was she the woman who had failed to protect the people she loved? Jordan's quest for power had come at a cost, and that cost was more than she could afford. In her desperate pursuit to reclaim her former strength, she had lost touch with the very things that once grounded her, her integrity, her sense of self, and the relationships that mattered most. Now, as she stood at the crossroads of her own life, she was faced with the harsh truth: reclaiming control might mean losing everything that truly mattered. Jordan finds herself caught in a dangerous game of playing both sides, trying to hold on to the affections of both Isaiah and Curtis. This isn't just a romantic triangle, it's a web of manipulation, self-doubt, and desperation. As her emotional turmoil continues to unfold, she's becoming more aware of the fine line she's walking between the two men. On one side, there's Isaiah, the kind, patient man who had offered her solace in the chaos of her life. On the other, there's Curtis, the man who represents everything she's fought for: her past, her mistakes, and the possibility of reconciliation. But what began as a struggle to find herself has now turned into a battle for control. And Jordan is playing both men in a dangerous dance that threatens to destroy everything she holds dear. As the tension rises, Jordan's attempts to juggle her feelings for both men begin to take their toll. She feels herself slipping further into a role that no longer fits her, a woman torn between love and obligation, between the desire for emotional stability and the pull of the past. She knows the stakes are high. If Curtis finds out about her lingering feelings for Isaiah, or worse, if Isaiah discovers she's still emotionally tied to Curtis, everything will unravel. But Jordan is blinded by her need for control, her need to feel wanted and validated. And so, she keeps playing the game, desperately trying to keep both men at arm's length, while slowly losing grip on herself in the process. Her manipulation isn't overt. She doesn't set out to hurt anyone. But she can't stop herself from needing both men. With Isaiah, she seeks the calm and warmth that she's always craved, the love that makes her feel whole. But with Curtis, there's the unresolved tension, the passion, and the history that pulls her back into a vortex of old wounds and unhealed emotions. The more she tries to balance these two sides, the more she feels herself slipping, losing touch with the woman she once was, and the person she wants to become. Meanwhile, both Isaiah and Curtis are beginning to feel the pressure of her indecision. Isaiah, ever the compassionate one, begins to sense that something is off. His patience, once endless, starts to wear thin as he realizes that Jordan is holding back from him, withholding pieces of her heart. Curtis, on the other hand, sees through the cracks in her facade. His own struggles with the truth have made him more perceptive, and he can tell that Jordan isn't being entirely honest with him. Tensions rise, and the more Jordan tries to keep the peace, the more she finds herself trapped in a situation she can't control. This constant juggling act, this dance of lies, half-truths, and emotional manipulation, begins to take its toll on Jordan's mental health. She can feel the strain, the stress of constantly having to put on different faces for the people she cares about. She starts second-guessing her decisions, wondering if she's losing herself in the process. The more she plays the game, the more she realizes that she's playing with fire. And one wrong move could destroy everything. In the midst of this emotional chaos, she's forced to confront the deeper issue at hand, her own insecurity, her fear of being alone, and her inability to fully commit to one person. As she navigates this increasingly tangled web of relationships, Jordan realizes that she's not just fighting for love or affection. She's fighting to fill a void inside herself, a void that no one, not even Isaiah or Curtis, can truly fill. But the longer she plays this dangerous game, the more she risks losing both of them, and, more importantly, herself. What started as a search for connection has turned into a battle for control. A battle that Jordan may not be able to win without making sacrifices that could cost her everything. The choices she makes in the coming days will not just determine her future with Isaiah and Curtis, they will shape the rest of her life, and the lives of those she loves. The stakes have never been higher, and Jordan is finding herself on the edge of a precipice, where one false step could send everything tumbling into chaos. Jordan's quest for control had led her down a treacherous path, one that was threatening to undo everything she had worked so hard for. Once a woman of poise and authority, Jordan now found herself entangled in the web of lies, manipulation, and personal turmoil that was spinning out of her control. The complexities of her emotions, once carefully compartmentalized, were now spilling over, blending together in a chaotic storm of confusion, doubt, and fear. She had always prided herself on being in charge, on having the strength to face any challenge that came her way. But now, as the stakes grew higher, Jordan realized that even the strongest of wills could be shattered by the weight of the choices she had made. The last few months had been a whirlwind for Jordan, starting with the dissolution of her relationship with Curtis. Their marriage, once the anchor of her life, had crumbled under the weight of unspoken truths and hidden desires. Curtis, who had always been the one person she could rely on, had become a symbol of everything she feared losing. The betrayal she felt when he pulled away, both emotionally and physically, had shaken her to her core. But it wasn't just the loss of Curtis that left her reeling, it was the realization that she had never truly been in control of her own emotions. For years, she had convinced herself that her career and her professional achievements were enough to fill the void inside her. But when Curtis left, that void became unbearable. In her attempt to regain control of her life, Jordan began to make decisions that only deepened her descent into chaos. She found herself turning to Isaiah, the one man who had shown her kindness and understanding, but even his presence couldn't calm the storm within her. Instead of finding solace in Isaiah's arms, she found herself trapped in a cycle of emotional dependency, one that kept pulling her back to Curtis, even as she tried to move forward. It was as if she was trying to reclaim the life she had lost. But in doing so, she was losing herself even further. But it wasn't just her relationships that were slipping away. Jordan's role as commissioner, once a source of pride and accomplishment, was now becoming a source of stress and anxiety. She had always been a dedicated professional, but the pressure of maintaining control in her personal life had begun to take a toll on her work. She found herself making impulsive decisions, second-guessing her choices, and pushing away the very people who had once supported her. The job that had once defined her was now a reminder of everything she had failed to protect. In the midst of this turmoil, Jordan's path intersected with that of Drew, a man who had his own secrets and desires. Drew's presence in her life was a constant reminder of the choices she had made, both good and bad. His involvement with Sidwell, a dangerous and calculating figure, only added to the complexity of the situation. Jordan, who had once been able to see through deception with ease, was now finding herself tangled in a web of lies and half-truths that she couldn't escape from. The more she pushed to regain control, the more she felt herself slipping, and the more she found herself questioning the decisions she had made. Sidwell's influence began to seep into every corner of Jordan's life, further complicating the emotional and moral dilemmas she was facing. His involvement with Drew, coupled with his growing power in Port Charles, made him a formidable adversary. Jordan knew that if she didn't act fast, Sidwell's grip on the city would tighten, and she would lose not only her personal life but her professional integrity as well. She couldn't let him win. She couldn't let her own weakness be exploited by someone like Sidwell, who thrived on control and manipulation. But as much as Jordan wanted to take action, she found herself paralyzed by the weight of her own choices. Her relationship with Curtis had left her with emotional scars that were still healing, and her attempts to find solace in Isaiah only reminded her of what she had lost. Every step she took to reclaim her power seemed to lead her deeper into a spiral of self-doubt and confusion. She was no longer sure of who she was or what she stood for. The woman who had once been a symbol of strength was now a shell of herself, caught in a web of her own making. The breaking point came when Jordan realized that the one thing she had been holding onto, her control, was slipping away faster than she could manage. She had spent years building her career, her life, around the idea of control, but now, with every relationship fraying and every decision leading her further into chaos, she realized that control had never truly been in her hands. It had been an illusion all along. As the situation with Sidwell continued to escalate, Jordan found herself facing an ultimatum. She could either continue down the path of self-destruction, clinging to a false sense of control, or she could take a step back, reassess her life, and find a way to rebuild from the ground up. The stakes were higher than ever, and the consequences of her actions would ripple through her life and the lives of those she loved. Jordan's path forward was unclear, but one thing was certain. She could no longer live in the illusion of control. Whether she faced the chaos with strength or succumbed to the darkness that had taken hold of her, only time would tell. But as the pressures mounted and the walls closed in, Jordan knew that the only way out was through. She would have to confront her demons head-on, not just for herself, but for those who depended on her. And in doing so, she would have to decide whether reclaiming control was worth the cost, or if it was time to let go and rebuild from the ashes of her own making.